Why humans are called the final option in galactic wars. Across the galaxy, some words are never spoken lightly. Some names are so heavy that even hardened generals hesitate before saying them, and some phrases are so drenched in history and blood that they silence entire rooms. The final option. It is not a weapon. It is not a strategy. It is not a fleet, nor a device hidden in the vaults of some forgotten empire. It is a species. A people. A force of nature. It is humanity. Ask a Zeeth tactician about them, and his mandibles will click with unease. Ask a Kaliri matron, and she will lower her eyes as though warding off a curse. Even the cold-blooded SYRH, who pride themselves on their logic, grow quiet when the term is spoken. Because they know. They all know. Once humans are called upon in a galactic war, the shape of the conflict changes. It is no longer about territory. It is no longer about treaties, or resources, or political leverage. When humans step in, wars stop being contests of willpower. They become battles of survival. They become endings. It wasn't always like this. In the earliest days of interstellar contact, humanity was considered unremarkable. Fragile, even. Their homeworld was judged as average, a modest-sized blue sphere orbiting an ordinary star, tucked away on the edge of a spiral arm. Their technology was primitive compared to that of the great civilizations. Their bodies were soft, their lifespans short. At first, they were dismissed as inconsequential. Another mammalian species, the records noted. Emotional. Impulsive. Limited. But history has a cruel way of mocking those who underestimate. For in the decades that followed their arrival on the galactic stage, one fact became impossible to deny: humans survived what others could not. The stories began quietly. A human crew stranded on a frozen moon where temperatures plunged far below survivability. They lasted weeks longer than any projection had estimated, clinging to life through sheer willpower, cannibalizing their own ship, and inventing crude shelters from wreckage. Another incident: a research station was invaded by pirates. The human scientists, untrained in combat, fought back with improvised weapons, their stubborn resistance forcing the attackers to retreat. Each tale spread like fire among the stars. Other species listened with a mix of fascination and horror. What kind of beings endured frostbite, starvation, and despair, and still rose to fight? What kind of species turned broken metal into weapons, fear into rage, and hopelessness into determination? And slowly, a reputation formed. But the moment the galaxy truly learned fear was during the First Galactic War of the Union. The Union of Nine had long stood as the shield of peace, a council of powerful species who maintained fragile order. Then came the Vaydrak, vast, hive-minded predators who stripped worlds bare. Their fleets consumed system after system, advancing like an endless tide. The Union fought. They threw their ships, their armies, their most brilliant strategies at the swarm. And they failed. Worlds burned. Colonies fell silent. The Vaydrak could not be bargained with, could not be reasoned with. They existed only to devour. It was during that war, at the lowest hour, that someone whispered the phrase for the first time. The humans, call them. The suggestion was met with disbelief. The humans were young, untested. They had no great fleets, no ancient wisdom, no legacy of conquest. But desperation breeds strange choices. And so, the Union called. What followed would haunt the galaxy forever. The humans did not arrive with grand speeches. They did not bring fleets glittering with unmatched technology. They came in small numbers, ragged soldiers wearing battered armor, carrying weapons that seemed crude compared to the Union's elegance. They looked nothing like saviors. And yet, when they entered battle, the war changed. The Vaydrak swarmed a human colony. Rather than retreat, the defenders fought to the last breath. Entire cities became fortresses, every home a bunker. Streets ran with blood, but the humans refused to surrender. They did not yield. When the swarm advanced deeper, the humans unleashed tactics the galaxy had never seen. Guerrilla ambushes. Suicide strikes. Detonations of entire facilities to deny resources. They weaponized desperation itself. The climax came at the Battle of Karthos Belt, where the Vedrak fleet prepared to crush the Union's last defense. Human pilots, knowing they could not match the swarm ship for ship, did something unthinkable. They rammed their own vessels into the enemy, detonating reactors at point-blank range. Entire wings of ships vanished in fire. Billions died that day. But the swarm broke. The galaxy was saved. And yet no one celebrated. Because what they had witnessed was not triumph. It was annihilation. It was survival at any cost. The Union elders looked upon the humans and understood something terrible. This was a species that did not measure war in victories. They measured it in conclusions. To summon humans was to unleash an ending. And so the phrase was born. Quiet at first, whispered in military councils, the final option. A name not of honor, but of dread. Across the centuries that followed, its reputation continued to grow. Commanders began to use it as a warning. When all else had failed, when armies had broken and worlds had burned, they would look across the table and say, "Shall we call the final option?" The room would fall silent. Everyone knew what that meant. It meant no compromise. No retreat. No mercy. It meant that humanity was coming. That is why today, when soldiers gather around dim-lit tables and war maps are unfurled, they do not speak the name casually. They whisper it. They avoid it until the very last moment. Because to call upon humans is to accept what follows: destruction, sacrifice, and the certainty that once unleashed, nothing will remain unchanged. And yet, despite the fear, when the time comes, when the war drags on and no other hope remains, the decision is always the same. Because deep down, every commander knows the truth. Humans are chaos. Humans are endurance. Humans are rage and compassion forged into one. And when war consumes the stars, there is no one else you want by your side at the very end. That is why humans are called the final option. If you ask a scholar why humans are feared, they will give you answers that sound clinical. They will speak of biology, of chemistry, of instincts. They will tell you that humans are unusually adaptable, unusually stubborn, unusually reckless. But that is like describing a storm as a change in atmospheric pressure. It is true, but it misses the truth that matters. To understand why humans are called the final option, you must look closer, at the way they live, the way they think, and the way they refuse to die. Adaptation as a birthright. In most worlds, intelligent life thrives within narrow limits. The Kaleri can only survive in the warmth of their equatorial zones. The Zeth collapse outside their dense atmosphere. Even the SYRH, masters of genetic engineering, require carefully controlled environments. But humans? They were born in a world of extremes. Their home planet was violent: storms, droughts, shifting climates. Ice ages swept across continents. Volcanoes blotted out the sun. Predators larger than buildings stalked their ancestors. Where most species would have perished, humans endured. They learned to live in snowfields where the air burned the lungs with cold. They crossed deserts where the sun scorched the skin to ash. They sailed seas that swallowed entire fleets. They adapted not just once, but countless times, bending and reshaping themselves with every trial. Even now, in the far reaches of the galaxy, humans can be found clinging to life on mining colonies barely habitable, on starships that would crush other species with their claustrophobia, and on barren moons where the only water comes from melted ice scraped off the rocks. The lesson is simple: humans are creatures who do not ask, "Can we survive here?" They ask, "How will we survive here?" And then, somehow, they find a way. Pain, endurance, and the human threshold. There is another truth the galaxy struggles to comprehend: how much pain a human can endure. Most species withdraw from agony. Pain is nature's warning, stop, or die. But humans have an unnerving ability to ignore that warning. To keep moving on broken bones. To fight with wounds that should kill them. To crawl when their muscles have torn apart. On the battlefield, this makes them unpredictable, even terrifying. An alien soldier might believe a human is downed, only to find that the same soldier rises moments later, bloodied but still firing. There are records, too many to dismiss, of humans fighting with limbs missing, of humans shielding allies with their own bodies, of humans dragging others to safety while their own lives ebbed away with each heartbeat. And perhaps strangest of all, they do not see this as extraordinary. For humans, it is simply what must be done. The curse, and gift, of emotion. If biology explains their endurance, psychology explains their fury. Humans are emotional in ways other species find alarming. Rage, grief, love, hope, these are not weaknesses for them. They are fuel. They turn sorrow into defiance, fear into courage, compassion into vengeance. Where other species see despair as the end of resistance, humans often grow most dangerous when they believe all is lost. A human backed against a wall, with nothing left to protect, is a creature beyond reason. They will not calculate odds. They will not bargain. They will strike, even if it means striking with their last breath. There is a phrase among the SYRH generals, never corner a human. It is not advice. It is a warning. But emotion also gives them something more rare, more dangerous than fury. It gives them empathy. They fight not just for themselves, but for others. For friends, for strangers, even for enemies who have shown them a shred of mercy. And when that empathy is betrayed, when they see cruelty beyond forgiveness, they become something the galaxy both reveres and fears, an avenger. Unpredictability and madness. The most terrifying thing about humans, however, is their unpredictability. Most species wage war according to logic. Tactics are calculated. Resources are measured. Even in desperation, there are rules. But humans? Humans do the thing no one expects. They launch attacks at the worst possible odds. They destroy their own infrastructure to deny it to the enemy. They risk annihilation for the chance of victory. Once, during the Iron Accord skirmishes, an alien fleet blocked every human escape route. The logical response would have been to surrender. Instead, the humans fired every weapon they had into the nearest star, destabilizing it into collapse. The enemy fleet was obliterated. The humans died too. But the war ended. Other species call this madness. Humans call it sacrifice. The human mindset of war. For most civilizations, war is an interruption of life. An unwelcome crisis. Something to be ended as quickly as possible so that life can return to normal. For humans, war is something else. It is not that they desire it, most do not, but when it comes, they do not shrink from it. They embrace it as totality. It consumes them. And once it consumes them, they fight with an intensity that shocks the galaxy. They do not fight only to defend their homes. They fight to annihilate the idea of their enemy. They fight to ensure the enemy never rises again. It is why their history is written in last stands, in scorched earth, in victories that look like tragedies. It is why, once unleashed, they are never forgotten. A species that refuses to die. Perhaps the best way to understand humanity is this: they refuse to accept extinction. Other species have fallen in history. Civilizations that shone bright, then dimmed and vanished. Some were destroyed by war. Some by famine. Some by time itself. But humans? They have stared at extinction countless times: asteroids, plagues, wars that killed millions, weapons that could have erased them, and each time, they clawed their way back. The galaxy has begun to notice a pattern. When humans are cornered, when survival seems impossible, they do not vanish quietly. They explode outward, like a dying star. They burn everything around them rather than fade. And in that fire, they are reborn. The alien view. To aliens, this makes them incomprehensible. The Kaliri say, humans are cursed with an excess of soul. The SYRH say, they are the only species that embraces death as a tool. The Zeeth whisper, they do not fear endings, because they are willing to become the ending themselves. And yet, despite the fear, there is also awe. For in every council chamber, in every war room, the conclusion is always the same: when everything else fails, when survival is measured not in victory but in existence itself. You call the humans. Because humans do not calculate whether survival is possible. They assume it must be. And they will destroy everything, even themselves, to make it so. This is the nature of humanity. Not their weapons. Not their fleets. Not their technology. It is their spirit, chaotic, reckless, unyielding. This is why they are called the final option. Because when humans enter a war, it does not continue. It ends. The first war that changed everything. History is littered with wars, but not all wars are remembered. Most fade into records, numbers, charts, and treaties. But some wars become scars on the galaxy itself, etched so deeply that even centuries later, species still speak of them in hushed tones. For humanity, the scar was the first Union war against the Vedrak swarm. It began, as many calamities do, with arrogance. The rising threat. The Vedrak were not like other civilizations. They were not diplomats, not traders, not builders. They were devourers. Their hive fleets swept across systems like locusts across fields. They did not conquer. They consumed. Worlds that fell to them were stripped bare, oceans boiled away, forests turned to ash, cities reduced to rubble. Nothing living remained. The Union of Nine, proud guardians of peace, believed they could hold the swarm back. They deployed fleets, they enforced blockades, they fought battle after battle. But the Vedrak never stopped. For every fleet destroyed, two more emerged from the void. And the Union began to crack. The world fell silent. Refugees flooded safer systems. Leaders whispered of despair. And then, when defeat seemed inevitable, someone, somewhere, dared to suggest the unthinkable. Summon the humans. The reluctant choice. The debate was fierce. Many argued it was madness. The humans were still young to the stars. Their fleets were small, their weapons crude. Others countered, and yet, they endure. No matter what we throw at them, they find a way. We are running out of ways. Desperation decided what reason would not. The message was sent. And humanity answered. But the galaxy expected armies of polished soldiers, shining fleets, flawless precision. What they got instead were ragged battalions, patched armor, and ships held together by sheer stubbornness. The Union watched in silence, unimpressed. The Vedrak, amused, pressed their advance. And then the humans began to fight. The first clashes. At Darsal's rim, the Vedrak launched an assault against a lightly defended world. The Union fleet withdrew, unwilling to waste ships. The humans stayed. They dug trenches around cities. They turned mines into bunkers, homes into strongholds. Every street became a kill zone. For 3 months, the humans fought. They had no reinforcements. No hope of victory. Yet the Vedrak advance stalled. When the swarm finally broke through, the humans detonated their own infrastructure, burying enemy forces under collapsing mountains. They destroyed their own supply depots to deny the enemy food. They scorched the very land they stood on. By the time the world fell, the swarm had lost millions of drones. The cost of progress was staggering. And in the ashes, a whisper began to spread: these creatures do not fight to win. They fight to deny you victory. The turning point, Cart-Hose Belt. The defining moment came at the Battle of Cart-Hose Belt. The Vaydrak had cornered the Union's last major fleet. Defeat would mean the fall of half the galaxy. The Union prepared for annihilation. But the humans had a plan. A plan so reckless that no alien commander would have considered it. Their fleet, smaller, weaker, already bleeding from endless battles, did not form a defensive line. They did not protect the civilians behind them. Instead, they charged directly into the swarm. At first, it seemed suicidal. Human ships collided with enemy vessels in a frenzy of explosions. Pilots rammed their own craft into hive carriers, detonating reactors at point-blank range. Entire squadrons vanished in fire. But with every sacrifice, the swarm faltered. Their formation collapsed under the chaos. Union ships, stunned at first, surged into the gaps. For hours, the void burned. By the time it ended, the swarm was broken. The Vaydrak retreated, bleeding, scattered. The war was not over, but for the first time, it was survivable. And the galaxy stared in horror at the humans who had made it possible. The price of victory. Victory was not without cost. Entire human fleets were annihilated. Colonies were stripped bare to fuel the war. Entire generations were lost in a single campaign. But the humans did not weep for the price. They buried their dead, rebuilt their ships, and when the Union leaders asked them how they could bear such sacrifice, the humans answered with words that chilled the chamber. Because extinction is worse. That was when the galaxy truly understood. For most species, war has limits. There are lines they will not cross, costs they will not bear. But for humans, the line is simple, survival. And once survival is threatened, no price is too high. The name is spoken. When the Union finally declared victory years later, the celebration was muted. For though the swarm was beaten back, the galaxy had seen what it cost to win. They had seen humanity fight like a species with nothing to lose. They had seen humanity turn their own bodies, their own homes, their own fleets into weapons. They had seen annihilation delivered not by machines, but by willpower. And in the council halls, generals began to use the phrase in whispers. The final option. A title not given, but earned. A recognition not of glory, but of dread. The legacy. Centuries later, the story is still told. At first, some doubted it. They thought the tales exaggerated, the numbers inflated. But survivors, both human and alien, tell the same stories. They remember the soldiers who fought with shattered limbs. The pilots who flew their burning ships into enemy carriers. The engineers who detonated reactors with themselves still inside. And so, even long after the Vaydrak were scattered, the legend of humanity remained. The galaxy had learned something it could never forget. Once humans were called into a war, that war no longer belonged to the enemy. It belonged to the humans. And the humans would end it. That is why the First Union War is remembered differently from all others. It was not just the defeat of a swarm. It was the revelation of a truth. Humanity is not the strongest. Not the smartest. Not the most advanced. But they are the most relentless. And when you summon them, you summon the end. That is why humans became the final option. Wars after the first, the reputation grows. The First Union War could have been a single anomaly. A fluke. A desperate species throwing itself into the fire. But it wasn't. The galaxy waited, nervous and uncertain, to see if the humans would fade back into obscurity. Instead, history unfolded with cruel clarity, the pattern repeated. Again and again, in different places, under different skies, humanity was summoned. And each time, the lesson was the same. The humans are not your first choice. They are your last. Your final card. The final option. The Goran crisis, the starved wolves. The Goran conflict erupted less than a century after the Swarm War. The Goran were a predatory species, raiders who enslaved entire planets to fuel their empire. Their fleets swept across trade routes, cutting off supplies, strangling systems into submission. The Ketheri, who led the defense, were brilliant strategists but fragile in war. Their soldiers broke under prolonged sieges. Their admirals calculated odds too carefully, retreating from battles that might have been won. It was the humans who volunteered first. They didn't fight like the Ketheri. They fought like wolves. Cut off from supplies, low on food, outnumbered 3-1, the humans fought anyway. They learned to survive on stolen rations, on whatever could be harvested from hostile worlds. One account from a Ketheri officer describes walking into a human encampment after a siege. They looked like starved beasts, thin, hollow-eyed, but still sharpening their blades. Any other army would have collapsed into mutiny. The humans only grew more dangerous. The Goran expected surrender. What they received was slaughter. Small human squads slipped behind their lines, destroying supply depots, capturing ships, and even freeing slaves who joined the rebellion. The Ketheri called them the starved wolves. The Goran called them demons. But the galaxy remembered something else: humans do not need comfort to fight. They only need a reason. The Siege of Nrios, the Silent Year. The Siege of Nrios is still whispered about in military academies. Nrios was a fortress world, besieged by the Drek for decades. The Union sent fleet after fleet, all broken on the Drek's defenses. When all else failed, the Nrios Council invoked the final option. The humans did not arrive in fleets. They arrived in silence. Small transport ships, scattered across the system, landing where the Drek least expected. For an entire year, the galaxy heard nothing. No broadcasts. No reports. No news from Nrios at all. When Union scouts finally pierced the blockade, they found a world drenched in ash and ruin. Cities were shattered, the Drek fleet scattered, their armies dead. And in the rubble stood the humans, ragged, wounded, but alive. When asked how they had won, the human commander gave only one answer. We did what we had to. We ended it. The Drek were so broken by the Silent Year that they never recovered as a galactic power. The galaxy took note. Once humans are unleashed, they fight until the silence itself is victory. The Yulari Rebellion, the price of mercy. Not all wars are won by annihilation. The Yulari were a slave species, bound for centuries under the rule of the SYRH Dominion. When rebellion sparked, the SYRH crushed it brutally. Desperate, the Yulari leaders begged the Union to send help. The Union hesitated. The SYRH were powerful. To intervene meant total war. So the Union whispered the words again, send the humans. But what happened next was different. The humans did not simply fight the SYRH. They protected the Yulari. They shielded entire villages with their bodies. They smuggled food through blockades. They trained rebels to fight for their own freedom. The war was bloody, yes, but when it ended, the Yulari were not just free. They were alive. Their culture intact. Their children are safe. The SYRH generals raged, calling the humans reckless idealists. But among the Yulari, a new word was spoken for humanity: saviors. It was a reminder that human ferocity is not born only of vengeance or survival. Sometimes, it is born of compassion, and that is even more dangerous. A soldier who fights for themselves may falter. But one who fights for others will not stop. The protocol shift. By the 3rd and 4th centuries of human expansion, the pattern was undeniable. Whenever a war reached its breaking point, whenever defeat seemed certain, whenever all diplomacy and strategy had failed, someone always asked the question. Do we call the humans? And every time, the answer carried both hope and dread. Hope, because if the humans were called, survival was still possible. Dread, because if the humans were called, the cost would be unbearable. Alien militaries began writing this into doctrine. The humans became the final contingency force in Union protocol. Entire star systems trained with the expectation that humanity would only arrive at the darkest hour. The humans did not protest. They understood. Perhaps, on some level, they even embraced it. For in their own history, long before the stars, they had been the same, the last defenders, the last survivors, the ones who rose when everyone else had fallen. The reputation crystallizes. By the time the century turned, the title was no longer whispered. It was spoken openly as fact. The final option. To speak was to summon images of fire and ruin, of soldiers who fought through starvation, of fleets that ran themselves into victory, of rebels who survived only because humanity refused to let them die. To speak was to admit you had reached the end. And yet, to speak it was also to admit you still had a chance. So the legend spread. So the galaxy learned. So the humans became more than soldiers. They became inevitable. Not the first choice. Never the first. But always the last. And always the end. The philosophy of fear and respect. The echo in alien minds. For many species, the phrase, final option, is more than military jargon. It is a prayer. Or a curse. Or both. In the academies of the Ketheri, cadets are taught, if the humans are summoned, know that the war has already gone too far. Among the Drek, children whisper frightening stories, do not anger the humans, or they will come at the end and burn your world to ash. On Yulari worlds, however, the phrase carries warmth, if the humans come, we will be saved. And so, the title divides the galaxy. Some speak it with dread. Others with hope. And most with both. The paradox of humanity. Alien philosophers debate endlessly, how can one species embody such extremes? The Zarin scholars say humans are reckless, ruled by emotion, unable to calculate consequences properly. To them, humanity's courage is simply a form of madness, useful, but terrifying. The Yulari elders disagree. They say humanity fights so fiercely because they feel others' pain as their own. That their recklessness is not madness, but empathy pushed to its breaking point. A Ketheri historian once put it simply. To most of us, war is survival of our own. To humans, war is survival of all. Perhaps that is the paradox. Most species draw the line at self-preservation. But humans blur that line with compassion, anger, stubbornness, and love. Their wars are never just wars. They are personal. The cost of the title. But while aliens debate, humanity itself carries the heaviest burden. To be the final option is not an honor. It is a weight. For every battle remembered with awe, some soldiers did not come home. For every rebellion saved, there are colonies burned to ash to make it possible. For every fleet victory, there are survivors haunted by what they had to do. Human veterans often speak less about glory and more about ghosts. One commander, when asked what it felt like to be called the final option, answered with tears in his eyes. It feels like being the last match in the box. You burn, and in burning, you save. But when the fire dies, you're gone. The galaxy calls them heroes. Humans call themselves tired. Respect in council chambers. And yet, even as humans grow weary, the galaxy continues to revere, and fear, them. In Union Council chambers, arguments are often cut short by a single phrase. Do you want us to summon humans? The room always goes quiet. Not because of politics, but because of memory. Everyone knows what it means. Alien leaders admit, privately, that humanity's existence has stabilized the galaxy. Wars that might have spiraled endlessly now have an endpoint. The knowledge that humans could be summoned makes aggressors hesitate. It is deterrence, not through threat of weapons, but through threat of will. The humans themselves often protest, we are not executioners. We are people. But the galaxy only nods politely, pretending to listen, while filing their names under the same category, last resort. Stories that shape civilizations. Generations pass. The wars fade into textbooks. But the stories of the final option remain alive. Children of alien worlds grow up hearing them like myths. Some fear them, bedtime tales of ragged soldiers who crawl through mud and darkness, who cannot be stopped. Some revere them, stories of human compassion, of soldiers who carried children through fire. Artists carve their likeness in monuments. Poets write verses about their stubborn courage. And soldiers, alien soldiers, sometimes paint human words on their armor. One phrase has spread across hundreds of armies, borrowed from an old Earth language, scrawled in trembling hands, not yet fallen. For even if humans are the final option, they teach others to resist long before the end. Humanity's own reflection. What do humans think of their place in galactic lore? It depends on who you ask. Politicians insist they do not seek the role. That they want peace, that they fight only when forced. Soldiers often grimace, knowing the galaxy will never believe that. But ordinary humans? Farmers, miners, and children on distant colonies? They listen to the stories with a strange mix of pride and sorrow. Pride, because their species is feared and respected. Sorrow, because they know what had to be sacrificed to earn it. One human historian put it best. The galaxy calls us the final option. But the truth is, we wish we never had to be. And so the philosophy forms, shaped not just by battles, but by memory, fear, respect, and regret. The aliens say humans are the final option because they are relentless. Because they will burn themselves out to achieve victory. Because they can endure what others cannot. The humans say, perhaps. But to them, the title is not glory. It is grief. And maybe that is the truest reason they are the final option. Because no one else will bear the weight. The last invocation, when the final option was called one more time. The galaxy had grown quiet. For centuries, humans had not been summoned. Wars came and went, but never on the scale of the Swarm, or the Drek, or the SYRH Dominion. Trade flourished. Treaties held. The final option became more legend than memory. For a time, some even wondered if humanity's role had ended. If perhaps the galaxy had outgrown its need for them. But legends never sleep forever. And peace is a fragile thing. The new enemy. They came from beyond the rim, an empire no one had mapped, no one had spoken to. They called themselves the Zorith Dominion. Their fleets arrived like storms, black ships with living hulls that regenerated under fire. Their armies were not soldiers, but swarms of bioengineered predators. At first, the Union was confident. They had numbers, technology, and centuries of cooperation. They believed this would be another border skirmish. They were wrong. The Zorith did not negotiate. They did not retreat. They consumed. Whole systems fell in weeks. Colonies burned. The Union fleets shattered against them, their tactics useless against an enemy that did not seem to care about losses. The Council panicked. World after world pleaded for aid. Fleets were recalled, but still the Dominion advanced. And then, for the first time in living memory, the question was asked again. Do we call the humans? The reluctance. The chamber fell into silence, as it always had. The weight of history pressed down on every delegate. To summon the humans meant the war was already lost. To summon them meant sacrifice, devastation, a fire that could not be controlled once lit. Some argued against it. They will destroy as much as they save. We have not yet exhausted diplomacy. If the humans come, we will pay a price none of us can bear. But reports kept arriving, worlds falling, fleets gone, millions dead. Finally, a Yulari elder rose. The same species was once saved by human mercy. She spoke with tears in her eyes. You fear them. You should. But without them, we are already dead. Call them. And so, for the first time in centuries, the order was given. The final option was invoked. The arrival. The humans did not come in grand fleets. They came in silence, as they always had. Small ships, ragged crews, eyes hardened by the stories their grandparents had told. They did not ask for glory. They did not promise survival. They only said what they had always said. We will end this. And then they descended into the fire. The War of Endings. It is said that Zorith had no concept of fear. But after the humans came, they learned. Human strike teams infiltrated their living ships, tearing out the heart organs that powered them. Colonies once considered lost were retaken, inch by bloody inch, with humans leading the charge through tunnels where no other species could survive. When ammunition ran low, they used knives. When supplies ran dry, they scavenged. When fleets were shattered, they rammed their crippled vessels into Zorith carriers, turning defeat into pyres. And wherever they went, others followed. Alien soldiers who had given up now rose again, spurred on by the sight of ragged humans still fighting. The fire of resistance spread. The Zorith advanced no further. And then, slowly, they began to retreat. The final battle. The war ended not with a treaty, but with fire. The humans devised a plan, the kind no other species would have considered. They would lure the Zorith core fleet into a star system with unstable suns, and then collapse the entire system, destroying both fleets in the process. The council was horrified. You will kill yourselves, they cried. The humans only answered. Better to die ending it than to live watching it spread. And so it was done. The system burned. The Zorith core fleet was destroyed. The human fleet was gone with it. The galaxy was saved. But at a price, as always. Aftermath. When the news spread, silence fell across 1,000 worlds. The humans had been the final option once more. And they had ended it, as they always had. Alien leaders wept. The Yulari lit candles in every city. The Ketheri etched new names onto their walls of honor. And when survivors finally crawled from the ruins, battered and broken, one human captain was asked what message she carried for the galaxy. Her answer was simple. Remember what this cost us. Do not ask it of us again. The legacy. And so the title remains. The galaxy fears them. The galaxy respects them. But most of all, the galaxy knows this. When the humans are summoned, there will be no stalemate. No endless wars. No compromise. There will only be an ending. That is why they are called the final option.